two, one. We are live. Hello, Mr. Jay Baker. How are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, my friend. Thank you for coming on. Jay, you've definitely it's a joy to talk to you, because you make me when I feel lonely and outcast. I love connecting with you online. It's great because you have so much out there to listen to. Sometimes I'm here in Fresno, California, and
Oh, nice.
it's it's kind of it's been a battle to do the alternative, I guess you would say, going out into the bars and the clubs, and back 10 years ago doing some homosexual crossover, some gay and lesbian churches, weed churches, doing all of that, and kind of being outcast myself. I always found kind of a, a welcoming, at least, belief in you and what you guys were doing. And you guys were all the way over, I think, like Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah.
So, but it was always, it made me feel like I wasn't alone, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
good. Yeah. No, I mean that's great to hear.
Oh, where are you now? You're in Minneapolis?
I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Yep.
All right, awesome. And um, is your car okay? I saw on your Instagram.
Yeah, I got the car got broken into in my apartment complex the other night. But it's fine. I got insurance, so I got the window fixed. They stole some stuff, but nothing too much. So yeah.
I wish I did you find it in the morning time?
Yeah, I was taking my kids to daycare and we walked out and the window was broken and everything.
That's part of, like, the worst part of all that is I wish they would let you know at night, so you didn't have to wake up and
Yeah, right.
like
When I
at
lived
least.
in Atlanta, my car got broken into like 5 times. So I got kind of get used to that.
Oh wow. Yeah. So what I mean, it's crazy. It doesn't seem like a coincidence that you are there where you are. I know you have a huge passion for Martin Luther King and his
Yeah.
message and stuff. What's kind of on your heart, or what's going on in that city? And we can dive into kind of your story, but I don't want to pass over this time. It's 2020. Um, what's going on in the pastor's heart there?
Well, you know, oh gosh, a few months ago, a few months ago was when George Floyd's life was taken by police officers here and
Yeah.
he was killed. And it's strange because it's right down the street for me.
Yeah.
And we had, it was just one of those things where, I remember I saw the video fairly early and was just shocked. I was just like shocked, like the rest of the world. It was just like, what am I watching? And it was heartbreaking because, growing up in the 90s, being a teenager in the 90s and remembering the Rodney King beating, and all the other horrible things that have happened over also school shootings and,
Yeah.
young black men being killed by police officers. And, it's just, one of those things where you're like, the world is full of injustice, full of hurt and full of pain, full of lack, full of, just, it seems like people with no limits, you know what I mean? Like people who are willing to hurt without limits. And so, that happening with COVID was just really insane.
Yeah.
And having two kids that I didn't feel like I got to do as much as I would have liked to. I'm really in the middle of everything where the riots or the uprising, whatever you want to call it, happened.
Yeah.
So I had to, stay somewhere else. I had to put my kids somewhere else because
That's a
I
good
wanted them
idea.
to be safe. And I think one of the interesting things for me was as a father, not so much as a pastor. As a pastor, you just kind of click into like, okay, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about nonviolence. We need to talk about, police reform. We need to talk about, what does it mean to disband the police? What does all these different things mean, and have these conversations, which everybody on Twitter and Instagram and everything, we're having these conversations. But at the same time, sitting down with my 4-year-old and 3-year-old and, talking to them about, injustice and why the police aren't always good. And, explaining to my kids, civil rights, and Martin Luther King, and it was a good opportunity to sit down, and I had a children's book on Martin Luther King that I had bought years ago, just because I've always been a Martin Luther King fan. Found that and sat down and read that book to them and talked to them about loving our enemies, but also standing up for those who aren't treated equal, and trying to help them understand. My son was perplexed by the idea that there were different water fountains and by racism, because he doesn't, the little kids don't kind of have to be taught that stuff.
Yeah. So.
And I live with the majority of my neighbors here in my apartment complex are Somalian, so he plays with Somalian youth all the time, and a lot of the moms have head coverings and things like that. So for him, it's it's just part of life. And so it was really interesting to try to sit down and explain to him that people are cruel to other people because they look different, because their sexuality is different, because they're different, and it's one of those things where you're just kind of exposing the harshness of the world to your children, but also seeing, especially my son's connection to Martin Luther King and how much he loved him and thought he was a real hero, and compared him to, his, comic book heroes and stuff like that. So that was really great. Seeing the community make such quick changes here in this town, and seeing the mayor and the governors making hard decisions, and watching that and seeing how people responded for me was really interesting, because I try to really research things and really think things through before I come out and make statements or before I make a decision. And it was very surreal. Being a part-time parent, though, I wanted to go to some of the protests and do some more things of that, and it just wasn't possible for me to do because of the COVID and my kids' situation. So it was really weird, because I felt like my hands were tied. It's been a really strange time, but I've been able to support some of my friends who've been able to be out there and march and walk and interview some of them and talk with them. And we've had fun. We just had a really amazing pastor speak at Revolution last week about race in this country. And, so just trying to uplift other people's voices as well, because I think there's this tendency of growing up in the Assemblies of God and stuff, as a preacher's kid, that you've got to come in and be the savior. And what you realize is, like, this isn't necessarily my time of my voice that needs to be heard. I've got other people whose voices need to be heard, because this isn't this isn't necessarily my experience.
Yeah.
And so how can I be a friend and an ally to my Black brothers and sisters in this? And so, really just trying to do that and walk that line. And, it's still happening. We're still looking at this. So I think I don't have any great answers for you right now, or any super, super deep insight. And except for, it's just sad that we just continue to repeat this process over and over again. But I'm grateful to see that there was such there's such a diverse group of people standing up for equality right now, and standing up for civil rights right now. And so that's exciting to see and hear. People like, before John Lewis passed, hearing him talk about how impressed he was with the diversity of the people in the whole world.
Yeah.
It just wasn't in the States, it was all over the world that people were protesting and holding up signs that said George Floyd and Black Lives Matters. And seeing the civil rights become a world movement in the midst of a pandemic is extremely inspiring. You realize that it's not all about, it doesn't have to be leaders. The people were leading. And often, you've heard, I don't know if you've heard it said before, but it's like, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. And I felt like that was something that we were seeing happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been awesome. I love that listening to you. You always kind of go back to the Martin Luther King, and a lot of us. I'm 40 years old, and I've heard about that stuff, but I never heard his actual what he taught and the nonviolence stuff. It just seems like there's so much hate a lot of times in the church, out of the church. It's just if we disagree with something, we have to hate it, and I just love listening to your take on forgiveness and loving, and just because we don't agree with that side doesn't mean we have to hate them, and it just I just love that you speak those messages, and it's just so needed right now.
Well, grace is a really tough thing to live, and I felt like Martin Luther King Jr. and people like Gandhi, countless other people who I can't name right now, but have lived that and shown that type of system works. It might take a little longer,
Yeah.
but to not scapegoat everyone,
Yeah.
and to look at people and consider where they're coming from, not why they're right, but to see them as victims of misinformation rather than enemies, and still confronting that misinformation, and still standing against it, but also seeing that, the only thing that's going to change these voices is if I'm able to find some empathy somewhere, find some common ground, and sit down and have a conversation, and hopefully be capable of seeing their lives, seeing repentance happen in their lives, and seeing a shift happen in their lives, and maybe at the same time see a shift happen in my own life, but being willing to have the tough conversations, because there's just so much going on right now. It's hard to stay focused. We've got Donald Trump saying all sorts of wild stuff, and and we have such a short attention span right now. It's like COVID and George Floyd, and the political races, and it's just every few days it's something else, and it's hard to stay focused. So I've been trying not to jump on any hot button things and stay focused and continue my work. I mean, one of the things I try to do is remind myself that my work has always been towards reconciliation.
Yeah.
And continuing to do that work. And I had to remind folks in my church, saying, the reason I'm not hitting a hot button issue today is not because I don't think these things are important. It's that this is what we've been trying to prepare each other for all along, is to be able to live within situations and circumstances like this, and that we take the higher road, and that we figure out a way to help solve these issues by what we've been learning and what we've been talking about all along,
Yeah, big time. Yeah, that you had a great point there of like staying in the conversation. It does no good to just get out of those conversations. It's important to have a good voice in that conversation.
I mean, because none of this stuff is new. Injustice and people treating others less than, and racism are systems that have been around a long time, and trying to always make sure that that's something that's always you're always considering and thinking about in your work, is important.
Yeah, it's like I said, I just think it's awesome that it's a great thing to have you and have the reminders of like you said, there is nothing new in a sense, but the Martin Luther, when you kind of reach back and go to that, it's really neat for me, because I didn't hear any of that and stuff, so it's really powerful. But anyways, I definitely check out Jay Bakker. He talks about this all the time. There's a lot of great teaching and stuff, but I want to get to know you a little bit, Jay.
Okay.
A lot of us, we kind of know this part and that part of yourself. You mentioned earlier that you were raised in the
Assemblies
Assembly
of God.
Now, when you were born, your parents were already a part of the church. It was a Christian home
Yes.
you were born in?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And did you have any brothers and sisters or?
I have a sister, yeah, and I have an older sister named Tammy Sue.
Okay.
She's really amazing.
Yeah. So your parents were already ministers, or was it
Oh
like?
yeah, they were televangelists already. I mean, I think I saw a picture where it was like Pat Robertson and my parents, and I think maybe even like one of the Crouches and a couple other people praying over me as a baby.
Oh, okay. So you were,
Ironically.
yeah. So you were you were right in there from the beginning.
Yeah.
What do you remember some of your early life? Were you guys with them being evangelists? Were you part of a church like every week, or were you guys always in?
Yeah, no. My dad had a church every Sunday, and he shot, I mean, 5 shows a day. I mean, 5 shows a week. And my mom did 2 TV shows a day, and then they did the PTA, their church on Sunday. So yeah, my parents were, and my dad was building all these buildings, Heritage USA, and he was building this, huge Christian retreat center, whatever. I mean, it was like this, it's
Yeah.
like half Disneyland, half like church retreat center, or I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, it had everything,
Okay.
a water park and marriage counseling, and like you could see speakers, or you could see musicians, or you could see a passion play, or you could see whatever, Christmas lights. I remember there'd be miles and miles of traffic to just see the Christmas lights that my parents did at Heritage USA when I was a kid. I had bodyguards, because we had death threats and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was very surreal, I mean, I grew up on television from 0 to 11. I was on TV quite a bit, and my parent, my school pictures were sent out to millions of people and all that kind of stuff. So, I still get pictures people send me of Christmas cards that they got from my family at that time with me as a little kid, and so, yeah, it was a very surreal world to grow up in,
Yeah. I can imagine. I mean, I was raised in the church, a Nazarene church, kind of a conservative church back then, but I had a blast. I had a blast, up until about 12 years old. My parents were kind of leaders in that church and stuff, but I enjoyed going to church, 3, 4 times a week. Was it a fun experience for you? Was it just a blast running around, or did you
No, I
remember?
mean, there were fun times. Yeah, definitely. I mean, my parents had money, and I had a lot of, what I wanted, and I had great friends, and my school was at Heritage USA, you know what I mean? So it was like, there were lots of pluses and lots of minuses, you know what I mean? A lot of good and bad. I mean, it's so funny because last night I found some old DVDs of Miami Vice, and I was watching that. And when I was a little kid, I played Miami Vice all the time, and at Heritage USA, there was hotels and stuff. I would run around the
Yeah.
halls and with my shoulder holster and my toy gun,
Okay.
and scare people, be like, freeze, Miami Vice. So yeah, I had a lot of fun as a kid. I was in plays, I was involved with the church to that extent. My parents weren't as strict as everybody else's parents, which was interesting, so I was exposed to like music early on, not just Christian music, but also
Okay.
just general market music. Like I remember, having Run DMC albums, and when hip hop was starting, and my sister's a great musician, a great singer, and she loved everybody. She loved Boy George and the Stray Cats, and all the new wave stuff that was coming out. I think I was thinking the other day, the first song I think I ever remember hearing that really stuck in my head was "Heart of Glass" from Blondie on my sister's stereo. So it's one of those things where it was like I wasn't completely sheltered, which strangely enough, all my friends were being very sheltered,
Yeah.
but I was also be able to experience music and, Michael Jackson and different things like that. My parents weren't like, this is of the devil. They would let me listen to this stuff. And so, yeah, it was kind of a cool,
Do you know
upbringing.
Do you know why they were? Because Assembly of God is typically a little more conservative, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know why they were kind of not as much, or what was their?
I don't know. Like, I think they probably grew up being told so much stuff was bad,
Okay.
but they didn't feel like they needed to put that on us. Also, they were very busy, so maybe they were just choosing their battles, you know,
Yeah.
and like me playing with He-Man or listening to, Walk This Way by, Run DMC and Aerosmith wasn't their main concern. No, I mean, it was just an interesting childhood. I mean, my parents were also very loving and very graceful about things and constantly reminding us to love people no matter what. And so they weren't really deep theologians. I
Yeah.
mean, my dad's a pretty smart guy, but he's not really a theologian. But their main theology was love. My dad would end every show with "God loves you, He really does," and it was kind of that thing of like, at the end of the day, the love of Christ was their goal to show and to give out, and that was the main message. Like, they knew that they were doing Christian entertainment of some type, but the main focus was to get that message of Christ loves you. It didn't seem to be anything else as much as like Jesus loves you, and that they felt like once you've got that, everything else would kind of line up. When other preachers were preaching against rock and roll or sin or fornication or abortion or, I mean, I'm sure there were times where my parents definitely dealt with those things, but they definitely seemed to notice that there was a lack, if you will, of love being preached. And so they tried to, I think, fill that gap with entertainment and with having, they would have celebrities on their show and different things like that. That they wanted people to know that they were loved. And ultimately, I think that might be that, even when we have doubts and stuff like, is God there? Does God exist? God doesn't. But we know that love is this infinite power. And I think my parents kind of connected to that. On the other end, they had to raise $1 million every 2 days to pay all the bills and stuff. And they were wealthy, and they were, they had a board of directors that voted for their pay and stuff, but they were paid a lot. They also made a lot. I mean, they sold books and albums and did all this kind of stuff. I think the lifestyle was a bit much, to be honest with you. I think we could have lived by on a lot less, but that's what it was at the time. And it was the 80s, and it was kind of that whole like American dream type of thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was an interesting time. I mean, it was very devastating in 1987 when my parents lost everything, when the scandal happened.
How old were you at that time?
I was 11 years old.
Okay.
And it was extremely devastating, because everything I knew was, I didn't necessarily live in such a super real world. Not having bodyguards is not a reality. Growing up and the way I did wasn't living in reality. And all of a sudden I was faced with a very dark reality of, watching all the people I knew and loved just kind of disappear and not be allowed to associate with me. And, now, school clothes and budgets and things like that all of a sudden became an issue, and it was just kind of like, welcome to the real world. I'm grateful that I did it, though. I see other preachers' sons who are now successful and see their lives and see like them, a lot of them who are very out of touch with reality. And I wonder, like, would that be my life?
Yeah.
And that, and when you're raised in Christianity as almost as a business,
Mm-hmm.
I think it becomes this point of where it's hard to separate your life. Like, what part of that is in your life? Is that, is that your professional life? Is it your personal life? Where does it run?
Yeah.
What lane does it live in your head? And I think it's hard to separate that when it's so ingrained in you for so long that it's just not, it's, it's a job
Yeah.
too, so, and all of a sudden your convictions that you have are like, is this going to affect my living, and different things like that. And you start to have to make these different compromises of what you do. And I think those lines get really blurred very easily for people like that. And so I'm kind of grateful that I was able to to go through the years of my dad being in prison, to go through the years of losing that stuff, and living kind of a real life.
Yeah. Now, before like 11, from 0 to 11, did you feel like a Christian? Did you have a moment where you like accepted Christianity or God, or was it just
Well, I
kind
mean, I had a
of,
few moments like that when you're
yeah,
in the Assemblies of God, because in the Assemblies of God, they believe you can lose your salvation. So there's constantly like asking Jesus into your heart over and over again.
yeah,
Um, but I don't have like one day where I was like, this is the day, I mean, I was raised in it, you know what I mean? So I just believed it. And I went to children's church and puppet church, they had the puppets and
yeah,
Christian magic and, or illusions, and all that kind of stuff. So I grew up in that. And so, yeah, I mean, I believed it, but I mean, I also come home, and if people weren't home, I'd think the rapture happened and was
yes,
afraid that I got left behind,
The Thief in
so
the Night.
yeah,
Remember
yeah. I mean,
that
that
movie?
thing like stuck in my head like
Yeah,
horribly, and
yeah,
so, I was also kind of scared of God, even though that there was this concept that God is love, but there was also this concept of that I wasn't being taught the same thing when I went to youth group that my parents were teaching me. Like the people they
right.
hired were teaching more traditional Assemblies of God stuff. So it was kind of this kind of confusion of like, well, my parents bought me Smurfs, but then I just heard that Smurfs were satanic at this thing. And things like, so like,
Yeah,
I was very confused. Like, well, why would my mom and dad buy me a Dungeons and Dragons toy? And then, the next day I hear that Dungeons and Dragons are of the devil. So, I mean, there was like this really weird, like, you know, the music that they're backwards masking music that, my sister's listening to in the next room, so.
yeah. Okay. Um, what happened at 11? Your dad was in prison for how long?
My dad was in prison for 5 years.
5 years. So you were with your
Um,
mom the whole time.
yeah, but my dad didn't go to prison until I was 13.
Okay.
So from 11 to about 13, I had my dad around.
Okay.
But they lost the church in 11. That's when the scandal happened. It came out that my father had an affair, or one-time affair. I don't know what you call that, because affair means go on. So this
Yeah.
one-time discretion or something. And that came out. And then Jerry Falwell stuff said, oh, we're going to help you. And then ended up not helping and kind of turning on him. And so the whole scandal was just one thing after the other, just boom, boom, boom. And it was all over the news in the United States. I mean, it was on the covers of every magazine, the jokes of every like Saturday Night Live and all the late night talk shows. And there was no, social media, but it was all over the media for years, And so that was also a strange reality to kind of live in, that constantly, like
You're kind of like
people
feeling
watching.
like a divorce from, the kind of the acceptance of the world, and being divorced from that at that time, I guess.
Yeah, and then I would try to go sometimes connect into churches,
Yeah.
and then the pastor would use my parents as an example
Mm.
of what not to do, and when you're 12, 13, 14 years old, that it's pretty devastating, especially when you're just trying to find like, is there a place for me in the church? And then it seems like, oh, well, there's not a place not only for me, but not for my family either.
Mm.
So yeah, it's kind of, it's when you're scapegoated
Yeah.
and you learn what that feels like, it allows you to have empathy for other people,
Yeah.
and it's easier for me not to jump on bandwagons of shaming or the cancel culture or things like that, because I'm like, well, I went through that a long time ago that most of you folks don't remember, because you'd have to be older than me, and I'm 44. So most of the people online aren't remembering those times, but for me, I remember them very clearly, and I know what it feels like. And so I'm always going like,
Yeah.
where's restoration in this
Yeah.
process? Because that's what I was always taught, is that restoration and forgiveness and things like that were these key points of our faith. And then, all of a sudden I didn't see them practiced. I saw, the exact opposite practiced. So, where is that? And still today, I mean, I see every
Yeah.
time a preacher falls or anybody messes up, I'm not seeing a lot of grace, not from, it's strange to start to see more grace from conservatives now than I do from liberals. And you know, I was pretty much been a progressive person most of my life, but you know, it's like now seeing the progressives become so like have their own purity culture, if you
Yeah.
will, of
Yeah.
saying, well, you've got to lad up to our standards of being open-minded or this or that, and if you're not, you're out, you know. And it's like, I just don't like legalism in any form. I don't care if it's conservative or if it's liberal. You know, if legalism is in there where, you know, there's rules and regulations of how you're able to fit in and not fit in and who's out. To me, I want to be like, how do we continue to let people in? That's what grace taught me. Now it's got me in a really weird place where feel like I'm in
I know.
between
Yep.
two worlds.
Yeah. No, I understand completely. I live there, man. It's I've tried to help people realize that we can have difference of opinions, different theologies, and still be brothers and sisters. And that seems simple, but sometimes it's not. We have to have these separations, the denominations and stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, you know, I have a friend of mine who's a queer anarchist atheist, and he shows me and shows other people more grace than even I do. And it's been a real eye-opening thing for me to see, is how great, you know, grace operates. You don't, you know, I've seen grace operate without God, with
Mhm.
with my friend here, or with God in a very different way. And and seeing that, it really has spoken loudly to me, to continue to show grace towards my enemies, even people I would just so quickly want to, you know, we all just, oh, they're bad,
Yeah.
and be like, you know, wait, no, we got to have compassion for those people too. And sometimes it's them reminding me of things that I've taught in the past. My friend, you know, go, hey, you know, I kind of learned some of this from you, and you're going like, oh, yeah, that's right. So it's, yeah, it's kind of I don't know. It's hard not to get really disillusioned and really hopeless in times like this, with everybody just being so willing to just go straight to war and not want to be able to, like, we can't disagree well anymore. And
Exactly.
that's too bad.
Yeah. No, my hope is I have 5 kids, 5 teenagers.
Wow.
Yeah, 5 teenagers right now. And that's kind of my hope is, you know what? Maybe I've lost everything throughout the years and congregations have come and gone, but I've got 5 kids who are just filled with love and grace. And at least these 5 kids have that message, and they're gonna go out and hopefully touch a couple people. I mean, sometimes that's the hope that I hold on to. Is it's a powerful message, man. That grace and the love of God, it will transform people, you know, when it gets in there. So
Well, I was talking to Milo, my son, yesterday in the car about the person who broke into our car, because he kept saying, oh, the bad guy who broke into our car. And I said, listen, I'm like, you know, we got to love everybody, buddy. You know, even the person who broke in the car, I'm like, you know, there's a chance that they were hungry,
mhm.
you know, and they didn't have any money to get food. And so they broke into my car to steal something, to sell it, to get money to eat. You know, I'm like, I don't know exactly what happened, but you know, we always have to be willing to look at maybe that they're going through a hard time. And sometimes people do bad things because they're in need, or because they're hurting, or because they don't have what they need. And, you know, and it's strange when you have kids, you know, it's like, you know, all of a sudden saving the world isn't the biggest,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
your biggest thing anymore. You know, I mean, it's a cliche, but it's true. All of a sudden you're like, right now, me explaining to Milo that not everybody who breaks into a car is a bad person is more important than anything I'm going to do. So,
exactly. Um, let's have another question for you in the past. So we have this time of transition around 11, 12, 13 in your life. As you went through the teenage years, did you kind of stay a Christian through it all? I know your theology and everything has transformed and evolved, but did you ever have a time where you walked away from identifying as a Christian back then?
yeah, well, I mean, I think I went through times where it was those things where it was just, I just took it and put it in the back of my head. you know. I mean, I liked to party a lot as a teenager, you know. I loved drinking, you know. I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
And so when I would drink, that's how I met people.
Okay.
You know, and that's how I had fun, and that's how I socialized. Otherwise, I was afraid of everybody, you
Yeah.
know. So I love to go to parties and I love to drink, and I probably started drinking around 11 or 12 years old, and you know, smoked a lot of weed, acid and shrooms and all that stuff as a teenager, and just went to great shows and amazing concerts and had met amazing people and did some amazing things and some really dumb, dangerous things. And kind of went back and forth, but it was like this constant of you have to choose one or the other, you know. And so I was like, okay, well, now I don't want anything to do with God. Then I would get invited to a church camp and my mom would send me,
Yeah.
you know, and then I come back from church camp, like changed. I'm
Huh?
like, oh, I want Jesus. I'm on fire for Jesus. And all my friends would be like, what happened to Jay? You know what I mean? And then I would, you know, end up drinking again. But then I would see how those Christian kids reacted to me drinking, and then be like, well, they just wiped me out of their world again. And so I would be like, okay, well, maybe there's just no hope for me in Christianity, because I can't, you know, if I drink, they don't want anything to do with me. If I do this, if I smoke a cigarette, they don't want anything to do with me. I mean, my mom and dad, when my dad was going through his trial, you know, I was going to this First Academy Baptist school in Orlando. And I smoked a cigarette at McDonald's, and one of the kids from the school saw me smoking the cigarette at McDonald's in McDonald's. This is give you an idea how long ago that was.
Yeah.
And they suspended me for 7 days, you know. And my dad's going through a trial and my life's falling apart, and it's because, you know, some kid who was 7 years old saw me with the cigarette, you know. Or I dyed my hair and they said, you can't come back to school until your hair is dyed, you know. And so for me, I was seen at an early age like, oh, Christians are really petty people, you know, and maybe God is like them. Maybe God is as petty as they are, like dyeing my hair and smoking a cigarette, you know, separates me from them. But nothing separates me from the love of my friends, my other friends who drink and party with me and hang out and do stuff with me. You know, they don't seem to ever, you know, when I become a Christian, they're all like, oh, that's kind of weird, dude, but you know, you're still our buddy,
Yeah.
you know.
It's a weird thing when you realize there's more godliness in the world sometimes than in your church life. I
Well,
remember
then look,
that.
yeah. And then you look back, you know, then you read the Bible and you realize that Jesus didn't hang out with those church people.
Exactly.
And you're kind of going like, oh, but they all told me I wasn't supposed to hang out with the people that Jesus hung out with, you know? So it was, yeah, I mean, it was, yeah.
So what did, you know, that teenage years and stuff, do you remember kind of hearing, was it recently, or was it in that time that you heard someone talk about grace, or was that struggle through your 20s?
Yeah,
Going back and forth?
grace didn't really hit me until I started Revolution with a few friends in Arizona after my dad got out of prison. 18, probably 17, 18 years old, 19 years old. And I would say 20 is probably when I realized what grace was. And that was because there's this guy named Donnie Earl Polk. I think he goes by D.E. Polk right now. He's on Instagram. I recommend anybody follow him. He's a really cool guy. But family friend, I lived with his family for a while when my dad was moved to prison to Georgia, and they lived in Atlanta. But DE started telling me about grace, and I had a year starting Revolution, but there was such legalism, in my opinion, of who God was, and from basically being in Assemblies of God church, trying to start this punk rock church, that I just quit for like a year. I just couldn't do it anymore. I thought God hated me. And I thought, like, you know, because I would go on, like, I would take vacation, you know, from church and you know, go visit my mom or go visit somebody, and then I'd end up drinking or smoking, you know, and be like, oh, God's so disappointed with me. And I talked to my buddy DE when I left, and I was actually not even planning on leaving Revolution, but I left that week. I just called. I didn't even go get my stuff. I had somebody else pack my stuff for me. I said, I think God hates me. And he said, well, he goes, man, he's like, God doesn't hate you. And I'm like, well, I can't do anything to be good enough. And he's like, you don't have to be good enough. You know, it's grace. You know, you're making Christ's death in vain. And I thought he was just like, honestly, justifying his own crap. You know, I was like, whatever, dude. And so I quit the ministry, went and got a job when I was 20. You know, was drinking heavily, but I had a job, so I was like, okay, if I can keep a job and I can drink and party, I'm fine. And worked at the Gap. And one day I just was so tired. I just said, you know, Donnie, D, you know, if this grace is real, man, prove it to me. Mm-hmm. You know, well, he was already proving it to me by his actions. I mean, he was pastoring at the time, but he's like, okay, well, read Galatians. Yeah. And then read Romans and read Corinthians. Cause I mean, I'd read the Gospels mostly, and then some like Proverbs and Psalms, but that was about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And it was Paul where it really, grace became a reality to me. And it blew my mind. Like, I was like, I can't believe I've never heard this my whole life. I can't believe that this message wasn't clear. Now, it was what my parents were trying to showing to people. But I was even starting to question their stuff, you know, because I was going like, well, you know, they talked about love and forgiveness, but nobody forgave and loved them, you know, and so, well, what's the deal? What's the deal here? And when I saw this stuff, I was just like, it was like Martin Luther, the reformer, you know, when he had that moment of realizing what grace was, and going like, you know, putting up the 95 Thesis, you know, where it was just like this thing where it was like, wait a second, we've been lied to this whole time. The church is, we're actually under the old law. We've just created new laws in the name of Jesus, and no one's talking about this grace thing. Not that I knew of. I mean, obviously there's Lutherans and things like that, but we were told that they were kind of like Catholic lights, you know? So, you know, all of a sudden this idea of grace became true to me. And then that's when I was like, oh, I have got to do something with this. And it transformed my life. I mean, it went to the point where I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. It was that idea of like, oh, God loves me no matter what. If I'm drunk in a ditch on the side of the road, or I'm a big preacher, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And so that concept at 20 changed me. And I said, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do, is I'm going to tell people about this. And, you know, and so for quite a few years, that was my main message, was taking that message to people about grace and reading Ephesians and Galatians, and then showing areas in the gospel that Jesus was actually doing those things. Impacted me hugely, you know. And it's funny because I just remember at the beginning, there was so much pushback. And the strange thing too, it was like this like this complete like I was almost getting revenge with grace, which it doesn't make any sense, you know what I mean? Like, it was this big contradiction of like, well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to show them, you know, I'm going to show them with grace that they were wrong to do what they've done to each other and then to my family. Yeah. And that's kind of how it started, was like this kind of like mission to somehow, you know, bring justice to what happened to my life and to my family's life, kind of like a Batman type of thing, you know, like, I'm going to go in and be the Dark Knight of grace. And so that's what I did for a while. And of course, all that time, I mean, things have completely, you know, my theology has shifted and changed and moved and grown. And, you know, at that time, I was probably more sure of what I believed back then than I am now. But yeah, it was really, you know, it was really a reformative time in my life, and for, I think, a lot of people. And I mean, I got tons of pushback. You know, I mean, I remember speaking at Cornerstone Music Festival and having somebody who wanted to fight me because they thought I was preaching too much grace. You know, what about the law? What about justice? What about, you know, all these things, you know, and judgment, you know, And I was like, this is what I'm teaching. This is what I believe, you know?
Yeah. Did they did you go back to Revolution Church, and did they accept kind of this message?
I called Mike, and Mike Wall, who's the founder and the pastor of Revolution. And I said, listen, Mike, you know, I want to do Revolution in Atlanta. This is the message that's got me wanting to do it. And I think he was a little bit like, okay, you know, this is a little bit strange, but you know, this is also kind of our vision of what we always wanted to do, was to branch this thing out and do more with it. So he was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's see what happens.
What took
And
you?
we had conflict with the grace message, I think, a little bit every now and then, but there was something that was okay. We could actually argue well with that. So that was okay.
What you mentioned going to Atlanta, what was in Atlanta, or what was that to you that took you there?
Well, what originally took me to Atlanta was that my dad was in Rochester, Minnesota, in prison there.
Okay.
And he got transferred to the last year in prison and to Jessup, Georgia, small town nowhere in Georgia. And so this family, the Polks, that had a big church in Atlanta, said, hey, if you would like to live with us, we have a school that you can attend, and we're, you know, an hour and a half from Jessup. We'll drive you every weekend to go visit your dad.
Oh, nice.
And so I was living in Florida at the time. And so I said, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I want to be near my dad. And so I ended up moving to Atlanta. I mean, a huge part of my life was in Atlanta because of
Yeah.
that.
That's got to be tough. I mean, have, I mean, I've had rough. I was, you know, raised in the church until 12. My parents were leaders, all that, and then they got a divorce out of the blue. I thought we had the perfect family and stuff like that, and so my world around 12 got, you know, blown apart. And then it's been difficult to have that relationship with my dad over the years. I've gone years without talking to him, not because we were mad, just because of distance and stuff. And you know, that's neat that you were able to see your dad. Was it pretty much weekly? Did you guys kind of keep a relationship, or did you always want to go visit him? Was it weird?
Yeah, why? Yeah, no. And I think it was hard to see him the first time I went to see him in prison. I waited quite a while to go see him the first time, and when he was in Minnesota. But no, I mean, visiting him in prison was probably the closest I was ever to my dad. You know, he was very busy working, and even after he lost everything, those couple years in between, he was busy trying to figure out how to start it again or get it back. You know, he was trying to restore himself. You know, and it's probably why I've been doing Revolution for 26 years, is because I saw my dad just never stop.
Yeah.
But I don't work as hard as he does. Just make it clear. I have a different way of operating and working my life. When I'm with my kids, I'm with my kids. Besides maybe a little bit of Twitter and Facebook, Instagram. But but yeah. So we built a really strong connection when he was in prison. We had a lot of really great conversations. We talked about the Bible. We talked about stuff. We had great conversations. We had sex talks and breakup talks. And I mean, I was the one who told him that mom was leaving him when he was in prison. I was 16. That was really tough. But we had good conversations, conversations that I don't think it would have been possible to have with him had he not been in prison, to be honest with you. So there was a bond that I built with my dad there. We don't talk very much now. You know, but still to the point where there's like, when I see people talking about him and I don't think that what they're saying is justified, I'll probably just say, hey, you know, you might want to take another look at that. You know, you might want to rethink that. Only because, you know, I went through those prison years with him. Yeah. And it's, and the progressives who are there now who don't like him, because my dad's gone very conservative. I don't know what happened. He went really conservative now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's very like Trump supporter, all this kind of stuff. And we disagree on a whole lot. But but when I see, you know, progressives, especially now, who go after him and stuff and talk shit about him, you know, in my mind, I'm going like, you know, that's really great that you have time to do that, but why didn't you have any time to visit him when he was in prison? You know, why didn't you have any time to check in on our family when we were going through hell and back? You know, you have plenty of time to destroy, but you have no time to restore, you know? And so, and that's one, being a little bit hurt, and two, understanding people's work like Martin Luther King Jr., you know, and how you were supposed to see our enemies and treat our enemies, and also understanding Paulinian work and how Jesus worked. You know, so yeah, so, you know, you get that point of where, you know, even when my dad's doing things wrong or not, you know, like, yeah, like, I don't like the fact that he talks about this, this, and this, and these are easiest thing to attack to him. Why are you attacking him here? You know, but it was because we built a bond when we were in prison, when everything was gone, you know, and, you know,
Yeah.
it's strange to see, you know, I kind of wonder why the mainline denominations that I really like and lead to, I've always wondered, like, you know, I used to be angry when I was younger about, like, where was the Assemblies of God? Where were the Baptists? You know, now you know, as an older person, going like, where were all like the progressives who were like, oh, we heal and help and visit the poor? You know, I'm like, what about the prisoner? You know, what about the prisoner who's one of your own? You know, so I mean, I'm not angry about it. I just think I think about, you know, everybody's a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Conservatives, liberals, we're all screwy. None of us have it all together. And it's just every now and then we need to be reminded of that, because, you know, when we start to get this big head that we're, you know, that we're the elite, you know, we need to realize that, you know, we haven't arrived. You know, we all are in the need of grace, you know, and need to give it to each other as well.
Yeah. No, it's you know, I think it's really a lot of times people don't realize that these people are real people still. You know, they're dads, they're grandfathers, there's, you know, there's someone, there's a human being there that you're attacking, and we don't know each other's stories and stuff like that. So that's
No.
have you been able to keep that how did he, you know, when you were 20 or 21 learning about grace, have you recently had that conversation with him?
Oh, we had that conversation at the time. I mean, I would call him at night and be like, you know, why didn't we talk more about this? Why didn't you talk more about this? You know, and he would just say, you know, well, growing up in the Assemblies of God, it just seemed too good to be true.
Okay.
You know, and that we had a hard time accepting it. And so people were afraid of grace. And people still want grace on their own terms. And that's why I really believe that grace is a form of anarchy. And that doesn't really work within anyone's system, though. You know, it doesn't work in the conservative systems, and it doesn't work in the liberal, because it's always for the other. You know, it's for you, but it's also for the other. It's also for that. It's like freedom of speech. It's like, you know, the people you don't want to hear from. You know, grace is there for everyone. And it is completely unfair, and it is completely absurd. You know, it is completely radical. You know, it is a unjust system in so many ways, as far as how people think. So it makes room for everyone at the table, and no one moans the table. You know what I mean? It's like grace is the table. So, you know, but it also requires us to, you know, when we talk about dying to ourselves, we think it's like, you know, well, I have to die to my pride, or I have to die to my, you know, but we forget we also have to sometimes die to our own hurts and our own anger and our own pain in order to be able to sit down with people who've hurt us to make change, you know. And now everybody's so, you know, like, oh, I don't speak with that, or they trigger me, or they don't do this. And I believe you can give grace from afar. I don't believe you have to go and be triggered all the time or whatever. But at the same time, I think like we've forgotten that, you know, there's, you know, Jesus suffered, you know. Paul and those guys suffered and went through hell, you know, and it wasn't, you know,
It's a little different suffering.
Yeah, I mean, it's just now it's like we have to have this concept of what's okay and what's not, you know, and it's like we're very like, you know, it just comes all back to like, it's about me and my pain and my hurt, and I don't want you to trigger my pain or my hurt and this and that. I'm like, well, that's fine, but you're never going to change the world, you know. I've had people say like, well, why would I go to a church that doesn't recognize my humanity? And I'm like, well, you don't have to do that. It's painful to do that. But, Martin Luther King sat down with people constantly who did not recognize his humanity, to the point where they were actually, like, at night putting on robes and hanging his friends. But he still sat down with them and talked to them. And so my thing is like, listen, if you want to make a change, if you want to change the reality that we all live in, then you're going to have to learn to become uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to learn to deal with being triggered. You're going to have to learn to deal with those things. That's, it's just part. I mean, I go to therapy called DBT, and it's really helped me accept some of those things and learn those things. And when those negative thoughts come, you have to also know when to take a break. It's not for everybody. It's why we don't have a million Martin Luther Kings. You know what I mean? It's why we don't have a million Jesuses or a million, whoever. It's why we put statues of people like that up. Because it's rare. We don't have, not everybody's Nelson Mandela. But I often remind people that if we want to reach towards that type of thing, I said with the ELCA, the evangelical Lutherans, I'm like, somebody stayed around who was gay.
Yeah.
when they weren't accepting gay people.
Yeah. See what happened.
And someone stayed to make that change and to make them a full inclusive thing. And someone suffered through that in order for that change to happen. And someone sat where their humanity wasn't recognized, so someone else's humanity could be recognized. But we're in this day and age where people don't want to be challenged by straight white males either. So, and I get that, I understand that. So I don't often do the whole lot of that. But if I'm asked, which I often am, that's the answer I'll give. I'll be honest, because I think critical thinking is important. I think deep thinking is important. And I think giving honest answers is important, and if you go like, well, Jay, I can't do that, that's fine. I'm still going to be your friend. We can still hang out. I'm not going to judge you because you can't do that. I'm actually going to understand. I've had a nervous breakdown. I've tried to take my own life. I've had addictions. I know what it's like to be an extremely sensitive human being. I probably don't have a lot of friends because I am very strange in relationships in certain ways. But I also feel like, I'm always willing to take a risk and go forward and stand with people who others won't stand with. So, but it's also because I learned that what it's like to be the butt of jokes, watch my parents be the butt of jokes, and now my dad is like this super conservative that everybody, all the cool kids don't like. And I don't agree with either, but at the same time, it's like, I really want them to know my kids, I really want my kids to know their granddad, not necessarily the religious part of him, but the fact that, he's really good at building sandcastles, so whatever, I don't know. I'm working on it, and I'm a work in progress, just like everybody else. Yes.
I had a question. I hear you talk about punk rock here and there.
Yeah.
Were you, or are you in a band? Are you musical, or are you just kind of in that culture?
I'm in that culture. Actually, it's so crazy that one of the guys from my church and me wanted to start a band, and then this COVID happened.
Okay.
I've been in punk bands before. I've sung in bands. I don't play any instruments. I sang in a Social Distortion cover band called The Creeps, and then there's my friend who he sends me music that him and his friend put together to me, but we haven't done anything because, the world is ending. Yeah. But yeah, I love punk rock, but punk rock's not just about music, it's about living, and it's about truth, and it's about reverence and irreverence. It's about contradiction, it's all those great things. It comes at the right time and to the right place, and it morphs into the situation that's needed often, it's just like anything else. There's been a lot of crap stuff too, but but there's an attitude and a view that it's able to come in and answer. And like for me, one of my favorite bands is Stiff Little Fingers, and they're from the late 70s and from Belfast, Northern Ireland. And they came in the midst of the Troubles when there was a civil war, happening between Protestants and Catholics, and horror is happening. And then they came out and they wanted to be a band, and they had to travel between these barriers of Catholic, and Protestant areas, where there were literally, people getting kneecapped and blown up and killed. And they wanted to just perform punk rock music. But at the same time, their punk rock music was saying, like, I don't want to choose either side. I don't want to live this way. I'm not going to be this one or this one. I'm not going to waste my life on this crap. And it came in and it stood up against both sides and said, oh, here's your two choices, and neither choice is not. I don't want either choice. And that was a way of, they were standing up against people who, would want to kill them. It's like, you've got two people who are killing each other, and then you're saying you're both wrong. Eventually they're probably going to want to kill you. So to me, that idea of doing that at the same time keeping a sense of humor and not agreeing to be part of the system, to me is I love it, because it's something that also doesn't always take itself too seriously. And as passionate as I am about my work and about what I do, I was always raised with kind of this weird sense of humor that never allowed me to take myself too seriously. And always laugh at myself as well. And which is great, because I have learning disabilities. I have dyslexia really bad. So almost all of my tweets are misspelled. And, and there's always that person who wants to let you know, and just learn to do that. And, and my best friend is from Belfast and is Irish, and is, in Ireland, the way they love you is they give you a hard time. They take the piss out of you, and as they call it. And there's something beautiful about that as well, because it kind of confronts this like inconsistency in your life in some ways. Like, it'll point little things out that might be just kind of a little inconsistent or kind of there, but you just kind of put it out. Like, it just says, there it is. All right, now what are we going to do? We got rid of that. We made fun of it, and now it's, out of the way. And I really like that. So, and I think punk rock has that sense. I think, especially the punk that came out in the 70s and 80s, I just really feel a kinship with that. And so, it's the reason I have tattoos, so, and I dress like punk rocker, I guess. I don't know. I'm 44, so it's a bit old to be what I am, but I am what I am. So, but yeah, I would say, like, Stiff Little Fingers and Johnny Rotten and Joe Strummer are as important to me, as Paul Tillich and John Caputo and Martin Luther, and all these guys are my guys, and I can get as much out of a Stiff Little Fingers song as I can out of reading about. I don't actually read Hegel. I read about Hegel because I can't really understand Hegel yet. But even reading about that, so it's like all these guys are weapons and tools in my box, but they're all important to me. So, I can get out of, I did a sermon on Star Wars a few weeks ago, and there was no real like, and this is what Jesus says, but it was just the idea of just, using tools that you have. And my kids were watching, I finally let my son watch Star Wars, and it was in my brain, and that was what was there. It's like you use, that's why I feel like I feel closer, more kindred spirit to artists than I do preachers. I see a lot of preachers out there, and I don't relate to them as well as I do to some artists. And then some artists, I don't, I'm never in one place or the other, but I just kind of live in that in-between world and try to use that to do my work, and just So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting way to do it, I mean, and I preach sermons. Sometimes I use the Bible against the Bible, which is strange to me that I'm doing that, but it's just, one thing that punk rock does, and I think one thing grace does, and one thing those things do, is they cause you to really look for truth, even when it's not a popular truth.
Yeah.
Or when it's not, and I think that's what nonviolence as well does. And the idea of seeing some of these folks, there's just this common thread that I really like between punk rock and civil rights and art and music and even hip hop, though. I get a lot out of hip hop, well, too, and like Chuck D and Public Enemy and a lot of these folks, Killer Mike, and people like that. So there's a lot of
when you get out of this framework that everything has to be out of scripture or whatever, you start seeing God or love, joy, peace. You see it everywhere. And
yeah, I mean, I've almost seen it. Feel like I've always seen it everywhere. Like, I feel like I've always seen it more outside of the church and people who simply reject anything to do with God than I have in the church.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So did Revolution Church, or what happened in your 20s? Did that church take off? What did your 20s look like to you?
It took a little while to kind of get planted. Like we tried it in Atlanta, and then I went out to LA and was like, oh, I want to do it in LA, and then I was like, oh, it's not going to work in LA. So, just because of the people we were involved with. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to Atlanta.
Okay.
And then it went to Atlanta and it took off. And then Rolling Stone came out and did an article on us, like a 4 or 5 page article on us, Rolling Stone magazine. And then I got a book deal for my first book. And so, yeah, it kind of took off, but the thing was, I was still in the South, and I'm preaching grace. And so what I would see a lot of is people come in and hear this message of grace, and something just like, oh, now I want to go back to church, but didn't see Revolution as like this real church. We didn't have music or things like that, because we just never did anything the way we were supposed to. And so they would go somewhere else, and then it'd be more conservative church. And the conservative church would say, well, we see some red flags over there, and watch these people get involved with church and then come back and tell me I was bad. Strangely enough, a lot of those people now I see have nothing to do with the church. Which is always interesting to me. The people who fought with me about grace now don't want anything to do with the church. And I'm like, I often be like, I feel like you're not rejecting God. You're just rejecting really bad theology or legalism, not grace. So, so that was we took off. We were in what's that conservative Charisma magazine,
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, we were everywhere, I was speaking at all the festivals and in my 20s, and things really took off. And then even in my late 20s, Sundance Channel, Sundance came and they wanted to do a documentary about me, and they said, oh, we want to turn it into a show. And they did like this 6-part documentary show thing on me. And so I mean, there was in my 20s and 30s, probably Atlanta to New York. I mean, I had a year where I didn't work at all, where everything kind of just, I had to let my whole staff go and everything. But those were some pretty successful years. I'd say my least the hardest times probably been in Minneapolis, to be honest. Minneapolis has been a very hard place to start a church and to grow a community. And everybody will tell me why I've done that wrong or messed it up. But it's not something where I've really flowed well. Online, it's been fantastic. And I'm so grateful that my friend Mark Brown 15, 16 years ago was like, we got to get online. And I was like, well, if you can set it up, I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. And thank goodness I listened to Mark Brown, because he's the reason this church is still surviving.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's been definitely, I mean, I remember at least 10, 12 years ago, seeing you guys online and stuff, and you've been stable. I love the interviews you guys have been doing lately of your
congregation.
That's kind of the idea behind this podcast, is who are these people, where they come from and stuff like that. So I know you I've heard you talk about kind of the point in your ministry where that grace looked at the homosexual situation in the church.
Mm-hmm.
What point was that where you kind of started saying, changing your narrative on that as a
Um, it's so funny you say. I have not heard the word homosexual in so long.
Yeah, I never know what to say.
I think gay is fine. But yeah, this was probably, I was in Atlanta. This is before I moved to Brooklyn. And I mean, a lot of things happened for the LGBTQ community for me. Trying to figure out, like, for me, it wasn't ever really a big issue.
Yeah.
Like, for me, like, I can remember going to Cornerstone and speaking at Cornerstone, and gay folks always came up to me. I think it was because of my mom. Because my mom did an interview with an openly gay pastor with AIDS in like 1984, 1985-ish, I think it was.
Okay.
And my parents were always very loving of the LGBT gay community, and so my mom has been a gay icon for probably since the day she put eyelashes on. But so for me, and I guess my message of grace always made me a safe person. And so gay folks would always come up and hang out with me at these festivals or churches I would go speak at. Someone who was gay would come and be like, "Hey, I'm gay and I'm afraid to tell anybody." And I'm like, "Okay, that's cool." And we'd sit down and talk about it, and it was nothing where, like, I don't think they ever asked me if I thought it was a sin or not, But what I realized is that the church as a whole would want to if it's a sin, then you can't, condone this thing. And so it started to feel some of the pressure of that. But I would always hang out with LGBTQ folks. I had gay people on my staff before, but the guy who was on my staff said he wanted to be straight. And I thought, well, hell, who am I to tell him that he can't be? You know what I mean? That was my thing. I didn't, at the time, it wasn't, there wasn't this roadmap on how to do it. So I'm like, well, if he wants to be straight, that's great. Let him do what he wants to do, and, but one of my best friends in high school was gay, you know what I mean? So it's like, it was just one of these things where it was like, it wasn't this issue, but I realized I'm speaking at all these festivals, I'm speaking at all these churches, they're going to want to know, they're going to want to do it. I'm going to have some real clear answer. And so at the time I was more of a literalist. So I said, well, I've got to go into the Bible and I've got to take this apart. I mean, the word homosexual didn't appear in the Bible until I think 1948.
Okay.
Or 46, I think it was. I have a list of when those words started to appear in the Bible, and I actually came across it the other day when I was going through some old stuff. I need to find it again, but because I spent a lot of my career there. So I was more of a literalist. So I was like, well, I got to dissect the Bible. I can't just pray about it. It's got to be in the Bible because everybody else, so it's got to be there. It's got, and there's these scriptures that everybody uses. So I had to go through and look at it. And then, so I started reading, getting books that translated, because, I wasn't never been good at the computer. Like right now, my computer's broken and I could care less. So I had to buy books on Hebrew and Greek. And then I went and bought books that were historic accounts of what was happening in Rome at the time and what was happening in the Old Testament and how to understand all this stuff. I had to know, and it couldn't just be from one side or the other. So I couldn't just get it from Exodus, or I couldn't just get it from Soul Force, like I had to understand it on my own terms. And the strange thing was when everything kind of came down, Exodus, this asked me to come speak for them, which is this was a gay recovery, reparative therapy thing. Asked me to come speak. And at the time I was like, sure. But the only reason I said sure is because my dad told me when I was in prison, he's like, if you ever get invited somewhere, never say no. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll come. And, but I ended up not speaking there because of my final decision. And so everybody at the time, I think, thought I was just a seeker sensitive preacher and not willing to say what I believed. And I really didn't know. And I remember studying it one day, and I remember a lesbian friend of mine coming up to me and saying, oh, what do you think? And I'm like, well, so far I'm getting to the point where I realize, this isn't a choice, so that's interesting to me. And she goes, well, what if it is a choice? What if I do decide? I was like, damn it. That really like threw me for a loop.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. And, but I kept studying, and I just realized like, it was like, this is priests having sex with young boys. This is a verse that's more concerned about actually putting semen on the ground, or semen not in the vagina, because they thought semen held the life force, and that your body actually became weakened by losing it. So you should not masturbate. You know, this room is more about this Old Testament thing is more about masturbation. This one's about raping angels or messengers who come through your town. You know, this one is about priests having sex with children. This one is about people having sex to worship another god. And then seeing actually statues of the fertility god that they were worshiping, and then realized they did other things like kill their newborns. By the statues would have metal hands. They eat the metal hands up and put newborns in there, and they would burn to death. You know, and you go like, okay, so the idea of sexuality, which I think Freud really brought to our light more than anybody, wasn't something they were talking about. They weren't talking about what we understand as sexuality and what we understand stuff. And I don't know. I mean, if Paul the Apostle was alive today, or time traveled here and was like, no, Jay, I think it's a sin to be gay, I'd be like, I disagree. And I don't care. But at the time I did care more about that. And what I realized is that you could be, if you are a literalist, you actually should be pro-gay because it's not there. Yeah. And by the rules of literalism, if it's not there, then it's not an issue.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't there. And so you know, but gossiping and judging and all those other things are there. Sowing discord is there. Thinking only your group is right and the other group is wrong is, you know, robs you from the fruits of the spirit. That's there. But being gay or lesbian or transgender or whatever is not there. So having to understand that and look at that in the Bible, and realizing that most people who had that understanding of it being a sin because of the Bible says it had a sixth grade understanding of the Bible, which is most people do because they just read it for face value and don't realize how translations work. I mean, if you start to do a word study on hell, I warn you, your mind will be blown and you may not believe in it after you've done a word study on hell in the Greek and in the Hebrew. You'll realize it's an actual physical southwest of Jerusalem place. Anyway, or a grave, but that's another time. So I came to that conclusion. I was like, well, it's not here. And then I had this pastor, Pastor Randy, who was helping me, Open Door Community Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. And Randy McKay, and he was helping me, and Randy McCain. And so I went out to his church, and Peggy Campolo was there. Peggy's married to Tony Campolo, very famous, progressive evangelist. And Peggy was there, and I sat down with Peggy. I sat down with Randy and everybody at the church, and I just realized that I couldn't be quiet any longer. And it hit me in such a way that I realized, I mean, it just broke my heart, And so I also had a gay magazine call me about, an LGBTQ magazine call me about, from North Carolina, asked me why I was doing the Exodus thing. And they asked me if I thought someone could change their sexuality. And I said, no. And of course that got me canceled. But they paid me anyway, which was nice, because that first they said I was lying. And I said, I don't lie, or at least not about that. And so they ended up paying me, which was actually pretty nice of them. And they're no longer in existence anymore, strangely enough. But yeah, so I came out and said, hey, I'm an ally. I don't think it's a sin. I told my board, and my board was split down the middle. Some who didn't agree with me stayed. Some who didn't agree with me left and did what they could to destroy me. And we did. We lost all of our financial support. People was like, oh, you're tickling ears, and this is what I don't get, I'm tickling ears. I'm like, have you ever watched Preachers in Sneakers? I mean, most of those guys are conservative and have really awesome
Yeah.
stuff, you know, and you're saying I'm tickling ears, you know, some of those guys' shoes would pay my rent. I mean, I have issues with that because I don't want to judge people because they have nice stuff or they're more successful than me. But the point is like, I wasn't becoming rich or doing anything.
You were doing a really bad job,
you know,
Jay.
yeah, I mean, I really screwed up at tickling ears. I'm like, if this is tickling ears, then what the hell are you guys tickling?
Yeah.
I'm, you know, so I had to let my whole staff go. And it was crazy because we had insurance. I mean, we were becoming an actual like church. I mean, it was something that I never thought we would ever do. And so we lost, you know, that. I had all my speaking engagements canceled. And it was funny to see how some of them would not be willing to say why they were canceling me.
Yeah.
Like someone would be like, oh, well, you know, we decided we didn't want to have the same speakers 2 years in a row. And I'm like, well, you're having this guy and this guy. And they're like, oh, yeah, we forgot to put you on the flyer, or we forgot to put you in the. I'm like, well, you've never put me in that before. And I always had to make my own. You know, it was just interesting to see. And then the documentary was starting to film on me. And so the documentaries people were like, well, can we meet with these pastors who disagree with you, or the guy who's having your funds cut? You know, and none of them would meet with him because none of them wanted to be seen as anti-gay, or thinking, they never wanted to state it publicly that they thought it was a sin. So it was the most like strange thing to me. I'm like, so you guys are afraid, like you'll destroy me.
Yeah.
And in my career because of it, you know, that's fine. But saying it publicly, you're afraid you're going to like not be able to convert people to heterosexuality or something. I don't know what the whole point was there, or that it's going to hurt your church if you say it, you know?
Yeah.
It was a weird time. I mean, this was probably 15, 16 years ago. And it's weird to think how much, I mean, I remember speaking for the evangelical Lutherans at their youth conference, which was like 50 or 60,000 people. And it's probably the one time I shut up and didn't say too much because they were just about to have the vote to see if they would be affirming or not.
Yeah.
And I knew the importance of that vote. So I just kind of was passive aggressive with my sermon, with my talk, and didn't pinpoint anything because I really wanted to see that pass. And it did pass, which I was really grateful to be a part of, to see that happen. You know, but yeah, so that was it. And honestly, I don't think we ever fully recovered from that. I've never had a staff since then. I mean, I've had 1 or 2 people work for me. Right now, I've got Caleb, who's like my assistant pastor in training and does all of our audio and stuff. I mean, he does it for nothing. He's like a volunteer. And I mean, it's insane. I don't make a full paycheck ever, barely, you know? So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's all because of that. You know, it's also because I've gone through my own things and moved around and done my own things. But that was a really big shift. That was when things completely changed for me and changed for the church. And so I still love doing it. I'm going to do it forever. But yeah, the evangelicals, man, they support ministry. They support work. But you have to play ball, and I can't play ball. So
I know. Sometimes I wish I could just be normal and just have a normal, because I want to minister to people. I want to be a pastor of a church, but I just can't play the game. It never works.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks, right?
Yeah.
Because certainty is a nice thing too, and I liked it better when I had more certainty in my faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I liked faith without doubt.
I love, you said, I forget where you said it or where I heard you say it, but you said something about Christianity kind of haunting you almost. Remember saying that?
Yeah.
Can you expand on that again? Or?
Well, it was kind of something that I got from John Caputo, who's an amazing writer and theologian and philosopher, who Pete Rollins turned me on to. But he was saying, like, you know, how he couldn't believe in, like, everything inside him, his career, his work, everything was like, you know, you can't believe in God, you know, you shouldn't believe in God. And he couldn't escape this haunting, that there's something there that haunts him constantly. And so I took it even further, you know, and it's funny thing is that you mentioned this, is I said it to my father over Christmas. I had my kids last Christmas. Every other year they switch between me and their mom. And so I had my kids last Christmas, and I went to saw my sister, and then my sister lives near my dad, so I went and drove and saw my dad, and wanted my kids to be around his kids and his grandkids. And my dad has adopted 5 kids, all Hispanic, and so it's really cute to see my kids running around with all these little my Hispanic brothers and sisters, and I mean, and cousins. I mean, it's just wild, you know. It's really wild, and it's really cute. And it's so funny because my kids probably know so little about Christianity, and his kids know so much about Christianity that it's like, it's because I just don't want to brainwash my kids. So anyway, I'm sorry, that's a whole other story.
Oh, you're good.
So when I went there, I told my dad, and when my dad's like, I've got a calling, I'm convicted. And I'm like, well, I don't feel like I have a calling as much as I feel haunted by it, and I can't escape it.
Yeah.
And he goes, you should say you have a conviction. You shouldn't say haunted. You should say conviction. I'm like, well, I can't say conviction. I can say I'm haunted by this. That is something that insists inside me to continue. And so I said, but Dad, we're talking just about words here. You know, maybe your conviction is my haunting.
Yeah.
You know, trying to say it was semantics or something, you know, just trying to calm him down a little bit. But we had an interesting conversation because he wasn't thrilled with that idea. I should give him the sermon, because the talk that you're talking about was actually pretty good. If I toot my own horn, because I've heard a lot back from that talk. But yeah, you know, it's this constant thing of, even when I don't feel like God is there, or when I don't believe in God, or when my intellect doesn't believe in that idea, there is still a haunting by something. And I like that haunting, you know. And maybe I'm a bit superstitious, you know. It's so funny. I still carry my Bible everywhere I go with me. It's always in my backpack. You know, and I have some friends like, oh, I see you got your Bible with it. You know, I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't know why. I always joke like, well, I can't go out unarmed. Gotta have my sword. But yeah, I mean, there's something about it, and my work comes through it, you know. And there's people who have a really hard time on both sides from that, you know, even on like on the more progressive side of, you know, why are you so Jesus-y, or why are you so Paul, especially Paul, because, you know, Paul's a mixed bag, man. You know, it's like, you know, I'm trying to, you know, this past couple years, I've learned to accept myself more for who I am, and not try to be a people pleaser, and not let other people dictate what I do, especially my personal relationships. And, you know, my mom had this book years ago called Gotta Be Me. And what I've realized is I've got to be me. And it is really tough to try to be me, because I don't make people happy. Some people wish I made more money. Some people wishes that my theology was clearer. Some people wish I was more progressive. Some people wish I were more conservative. You know, and I'm really trying to be true to me. Like the other few days ago, my Milo was with me, and he was like, you know, Dad, I want you to get a house with a pool. Dad, you know, we can have a pool we can swim in. And yeah, he's not even 5 yet, but we had gone to a house with a pool, and he really dug it. And he's like, you know, Mom's got a backyard and a sandbox, blah, blah, blah. And I just said, you know, buddy, I think sometimes people choose to do things they love, and have to sacrifice certain things in order to do what they love and really care about, you know. And I said, Dad loves what he does, and loves his work so much that he probably will never be able to have a pool, you know, that I probably won't even be able to have a house, buddy. I'll probably always live in apartments, and we'll have all these friends to play with and stuff like that. But, you know, Dad has to live a certain way to do certain things. And Dad really wants to follow what his heart is. And I said, sometimes you have, but in the other way, you can make sacrifices to have those other things. And I said, I'm not willing to make the sacrifices to have the pool and the things like that, but I'm also willing to make the sacrifices not to have those. I mean, that wasn't the exact conversation, because I'm talking to a 4.5-year-old, but trying to get him to understand that as well. So like, if he wants to be a scientist, awesome. If he wants to be a punk rock guitarist, great. You know, if he wants to follow into a preacher, then we might have an issue, but don't do it, son. But you know, that, you know, explaining that to him was really interesting. So Yeah, because to be haunted is sometimes devastating, but it's also really great that the idea of grace will continuously haunt me, and that somehow it's always going to be linked to Jesus and the Apostle Paul, and so.
Well, you guys are building a space for people who feel like we feel. I remember, you know, you mentioned Peter. Um, you know, I can barely understand what he's talking about. He's just so smart and so
Yeah, he's
elegant.
brilliant.
But I remember him talking about that the truest Christian is an atheist, because anytime you can kind of grasp God's love, God can't be known, so he can't be that, or something. I don't know what he was
Yeah,
saying, but just listening to the guy, listening to you guys, I don't even know if there's a movement named about questioning or whatever. I know we've had the emergent church, all this stuff through the years,
yeah,
but you know, I call myself the Christian atheist for a long time.
yeah,
I felt better that way. And yet I listened to worship music every single day. And, you know, that's all I
right.
listened to. But I didn't believe during that time. And I've kind of come back to being comfortable being a Christian and being the type of Christian that you're talking about. And you guys, I think your legacy, man, it's huge. And, you know, I just, I think I thank you guys for being honest about, you know, your beliefs or lack of beliefs and stuff, questioning and doubt.
Well, I think Pete Rollins, he's kind of termed this. He's got this term that he uses, pyrotheology,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of that's there. I mean, his, and I think people like Brian McLaren have done a great job too, and Brennan Manning and guys like those were all guys who shifted me to this direction. Pete Rollins has impacted my theology in a huge way, but it was originally it was through other people's work that he would just connect me to.
Yeah.
And then this past couple of years, I started reading his work, which was really funny because we've been best friends for like 10 or 11 years. And I've never read his work until the past 2 years. And then realized like, he really is smart.
Yeah.
He does know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think people who encourage you to think well and think differently and to really look at things. I mean, to me, this is not even like, I see a lot of people doing deconstruction and talking about deconstruction and then, then eventually I guess it's reconstruction. I don't know. To me, it's just living life, trying to live life well.
Yeah.
And trying to perfect my craft, what my work is and my art is, because I want to see the world become a better place. And how do I go about that? And realizing like, okay, there is a place for philosophy in my life, especially because I have to cut everything down and try to simplify it. So for me, like if I read something on Hegel or about Hegel or something about Tillich or something compared to what Pete reads about Tillich, you're going to get something completely different from Pete than you are from me. Because I'm going to try to cut it down and take it to its simplest idea, like this good, that's bad. Because I have dyslexia, because I dropped out of school, because I'm not, I don't have that type of education. But, learning to see all these different people, and you have to do hard work. I mean, it requires a lot of hard work. I mean, I'm reading stuff that I never thought I would read or understand. And some of it I don't understand. I'll read books and have to be like, okay, well, that chapter was a complete loss and I'm gonna have to come back to that. But then the next chapter just sparks everything inside me and blows my mind away. So it's just, like, okay, well, I'll take what I can and I'll leave what I can't and maybe come back to that at a later time.
Exactly.
And I think anybody can do it. If I'm like this high school dyslexic dropout and doing this, I think anybody can do it. It's definitely not the road to success. I wish it was a little bit more successful. I'd like to I think my buddy Caleb deserves a really good paycheck, and I just want to be able to be a good dad and take care of my kids. And, and if I have to go get another job, I will. But I was about to, and I didn't, because Pete told me my work was so valuable and that I needed to continue to go on and move forward. And I'm really grateful that I did.
Yeah.
Because I had a lot of people in my personal life saying, it's time to move on. You know, it's time to kind of just admit defeat, you know, and I didn't. And here I am, you know.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I, we can, I don't want to end this or close this without giving you an
No, go
opportunity.
ahead.
I anytime I hear you speak about your mom, it's very heartwarming. You know, I don't know about your mom that much. I feel like I'm missing out. You know, like
Yeah,
I don't. I didn't. You
you
know,
are.
I bet. And I kind of heard about your parents from, you know, in a distant, far off land. And your mom seems like this such an amazing person and with a wonderful heart. Can you share a little bit? I mean, her legacy in your life seems humongous.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have a pretty good mixture of both of my folks, which I'm grateful for, to be honest with you. I funny as I have this little necklace, and it's kind of a big necklace actually, and it's got a bee on it.
Huh?
And I got it like a year ago, and I decided that I was just going to, rather than try to avoid being a baker and everything, I would embrace being a baker, you
Yeah,
know, and embrace my legacy
yeah,
that I have. That's not the most popular, but it's okay. Um, well, for my mom, you know, she is just born in International Falls, Minnesota, this little Minnesotan girl who was full of life, you know, and met my dad in Bible college in Minnesota. And they got married and became children's ministers and did puppets and stuff. But she had a lot of life, and she was insecure. A lot of people don't realize that she wore a lot of makeup because she didn't feel like she was pretty.
uh,
And she's really a beautiful woman. You know, with or without makeup. I thought she was really pretty without makeup. And I always tell her that when I would see her at home when I was a kid, even. But her makeup was kind of her armor. And I think that's what my tattoos were for a while for me. It was kind of my armor to kind of protect me from the world. Probably what my hat is covering my bald head. But, you know, it was like, she was full of life and full of love. And I think she could have never sat down and read a theology book, I don't think, or a
yeah,
philosophy book. She loved romance novels, you know, she loved stuff like that. Like paperback romance novels, you
uh,
know. When people didn't know that Fabio was real, you
yeah,
know, they just thought he was a drawing, you know, those kind of books.
yep,
But she's a complex human being, full of contradictions, to be honest with you, just as we all are.
yeah,
But she loved people, you know, she loves people a lot. She had a very sensitive heart. Um, you know, people always made fun of her crying, and that was a combination between she really did love and care about people, and she has also suffered from medication addictions, which, you know, things like Valiums and Ativan will make you cry very easily. But she had a lot of pain in her life, a lot of pain that wasn't dealt with. And to be honest with you, I don't completely know all the sources of those pain.
yeah,
But as I look back now, and on Instagram, there's a few Tammy Faye fan pages,
okay,
and sometimes, you know, I'll see these pictures of my mom, and I will just see the pain in her eyes, you know. And her and my dad, I don't think, had the perfect marriage, but she loved people. She was passionate about people. And, you know, in the 80s, when, you know, Reagan hadn't even talked about the word AIDS, you know, my mom doesn't just have someone with AIDS on it. And she could have very well found someone who accidentally got a blood transfusion and got AIDS or something like that. But no, she got an MCC pastor, an openly gay pastor, to come on the PTL television show. And my mom interviewed him. I think my dad was probably too afraid to, I think, but my dad still was the one who had to make that decision for it to happen. But it was like, Tammy can get away with it. And she could, you
yeah,
know. She was also very practical about humanity, and she, you know, and sexuality and all that kind of stuff. So And I think her own sexual. I think she did a show once on penile implants.
Yeah.
You know, she had the Tammy's house party, and how to get a boner, basically. Like,
Yeah.
but that was a reality for people, and I think they made it okay for Christians to be like, yeah, you can talk about erections. Yeah, you can talk about this. You can talk about life.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, I mean, so she had, had a guy who was an openly gay pastor of an openly gay congregation on a show being interviewed by an Assemblies of God pastor. I mean, what the hell? If it would have been any Assemblies of God preacher, they would have been like, you need to get right with God. You're wrong. I mean, my mom did say, did you ever try to like girls? And people made fun of it because how simple she was about it. In some ways, some people made fun of it and thought like, oh, poor guy, you deal with Tammy Faye. But what they don't realize is that was part of my mother's charm, and maybe part of she knew her role well. She knew what she was capable of and not capable of, so she knew that being silly was part of what allowed her to do her work. And I think that's what allows me to do some of my work sometimes. Being self-deprecating, and she would do it as though like, oh, I think she knew that, and that's how she did it, because she had to rely on the tools that she had.
Yeah.
And that moment changed my life forever, because I knew as a little kid that was a big deal. But I also knew that she was showing love and grace to somebody else. And it still blows my mind that not just that it was someone with AIDS, when AIDS wasn't being talked about. And AIDS was seen as the plague at the time, like the plague. I don't think people remember that often. I wish more young people in that community would look at that time, because it was such a horrible time for the gay community. And revolutionary time, I think, for America. I think it really did something for us. It was like, if COVID was only for one group of people, and it was deadly, like just you were guaranteed death. And but then also an openly gay man who was a pastor. I mean, just all those things. And she's sitting down having this conversation with him. And that changed everything for her and for me. And for the pastor was a part of it, I think, and the MCC, I just think there was like this connection between two worlds that wasn't supposed to come together, and it did. But she constantly did that. She constantly loved people. I mean, I remember one of her friends married Hugh Hefner's brother, and she went to the Playboy Mansion and visited her. That was, you're not supposed to do that. But because my parents were at a certain level, a certain thing, she could get away with it. Yeah. And my dad, they could get away with certain things of loving certain people. And that's the funny thing, is that's what they were getting away with, is being more inclusive. And a lot of people don't see that and don't remember that. All they think is like, oh, greedy televangelists. Yeah, my dad liked money, but he also liked building buildings more than he wanted personal money. He probably wanted a nice house so mom would be happy. What I mean? For him, his happiness was building and preparing talks, So that was his thing, so, it's sad that the legacy that's there. And then now that my dad's super conservative, some of that legacy gets thrown out too. And people forget that legacy. People see my life and are like, oh, you're so different from your dad. You're so different from your mom. And I'm like, no, I'm part of their legacy. They shaped me and put me in the direction so I could read that talk about grace and be like, aha, and take it seriously. So I could read the scriptures at the time and for LGBTQ stuff, take it seriously. So I could meet someone like Pete Rollins and listen to him and be challenged by him and take it seriously and find my own way to use that work to what I do. I mean, my parents built those things within me. Now there's a lot of dumb things that they did that, I mean, I wish they would have taken my education more seriously and things like that I resent them for. But my mom loved to shop. I actually think she was still feeling that sadness, but she'll always look for deals, we always go to the mall together and we always eat together. And I loved those times. I loved those times that we shared together, and we would just be friends, and have long conversations. And then, we'd go home and she'd go to her room and I'd go to my room, and we were just both happy enough to know that we were there. So I had she could be angry when she was hungry. She could be mean sometimes, not often to me, but, she was a human being. But she, you know, like one of my best friends when I in my 20s was my buddy Chuck, who was a Satanist. And Chuck would come home, you know, pentagrams on, you know, long hair and, you know, all that stuff. And he'd come home and have Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner and spend it with my family, you know. And my mom was there. My mom loved him and always loved all my friends, no matter what they looked like or who they were. And she just didn't have a lot of room to judge anybody. Even though, like, she would be like, well, you know, she believed in civil union and not gay marriage before she, you know, before she passed and all that stuff. But she still was like, she was probably never used the word gay affirming, but she was more, you know, but she was, you know, she would go to gay pride parades and lead them in Yes, Jesus Loves Me, you know, and she did radical stuff like that and she could get away with it and do it. And people would be like, oh, Tammy. But at the same time, it was like she was starting a revolution. And so for me, I was thinking about my mom the other day because I watched this documentary on this Puerto Rican psychic guy who's really flashy and wore all these capes and stuff. I can't remember his name right now for the life of me, but and I was watching this documentary and it was very touching, honestly. And then I was looking at my mom because they were both very flashy human beings. And I'm like, here are people who got made fun of for being like, my mom had too much makeup, or this guy wore makeup and was androgynous and he looked crazy. And in some ways he was hokey and then, you know, pop culture and all this stuff. But then I looked at both of these folks and I go like, these people had something that even punk rockers did. Because at least punk rockers have their own little community of like other punk rockers. So we're like, yeah, we're individuals with our leather jackets and our tattoos, you know. But they were really people who seemed to be true individuals who were like, yeah, and not like, you know, David Bowie did it in a really cool way, but they did it in a way that was just not as cool as David Bowie, but they still did it.
Yeah.
You know, and they were true to who they were and got a message out. And that whole message was love and acceptance. And maybe it was something that they got from them being who they really were. And maybe just being like, I'm going to live life on my terms and be happy the way I want to be happy. Even if people make fun of me, even if people think I'm this or that, even if people write me off, you know, but I'm still going to talk about love and care. And so there was something to me that was like even beyond punk rock now that I look at it and go like, man, imagine that. Imagine to the point like where, you know, I'm going to be a really individual without a group.
Yeah.
You know, without my own group. Like, you know, it's easy to be punk rock. There's millions of punk rock kids out there, people and who think different. You know, it's like being a part of a church, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just the fact that I'm 44 makes it a little sad. But, you know, what I'm saying is like, you know, but then you look at people like that and you get like, okay, these are people who really did their own thing and just didn't give a damn.
Yeah.
And if they did give a damn, they took that hurt and that pain and switched into another, because my mom could have taken that makeup off anytime. You know, she could have started wearing pantsuits, you know, or whatever, you know, and not wear a hot pink and leopard print and all that stuff. And, you know, find the craziest thing she could at TJ Maxx.
Yeah.
She could have done that, but she didn't, you know, and she loved people. And the cool thing is that to see how that affected my dad, because my dad you know, at least from when I was younger, you know, really loved people and they just did things that like weren't always on camera that often perplexed me. And they both taught me to love my enemies. Like when people would say horrible things to us on the street, you know, my mom would be like, God love you, honey. God bless you. You know, like never like go to hell or fuck you or, you know, I mean, they wouldn't say anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't like God's vengeance. You know, just none of that came out when the whole world was against them. They were still trying to tell the whole world that they were still loved, even when people came up to their faith. I mean, my dad is the reason that I sat down with Jerry Falwell and worked on forgiving him. You know, because they all told me about the importance of forgiveness. Now, if I thought that I would be 20 years down the road doing this, trying to get liberals to forgive Jerry Falwell, you know, and conservatives to love, you know, progressives, you know, I would have been like, no, you're crazy. But that's what that kind of thing did to me, you know, and I've just been lucky enough to run into and have relationships with people who've helped to refine their work in my life. So I owe a lot to them, you know, and people can take it for what it's worth. But so it's like, there's no me without them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's awesome, man. I see my kids. I have 5 kids. I'm a 2-time divorcee as
Oh,
well.
me too. Yeah.
Yeah. But they go with their mom to a Baptist church, and they love it. And
Yeah.
they're my kids. I mean, they've got this message within them, but they've learned from my mistakes, and they've kind of figured out how to not be undercover at all, but be themselves without maybe being as divisive as I have been maybe.
Right.
So, our kids kind of go from our shoulders, stand on top, and you've done that. You've done that, and I'm looking forward to what your kids do as well,
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, my son is got such a sensitive heart, and I can see so much of my mom and myself in him, and it's in some ways it worries me to death, because
Yeah.
I'm like, this is a tough road. I don't feel like I was really able to grasp dealing with that type of sense, that empathy that you get, because you don't only have sympathy, feel sad for yourself, but you're, and depression and stuff, but you're also able to feel it for other people. And I don't think I was able to really control that until I got into my 40s. I'm only 44, so I hope I can help him with that, because it's really hard when you feel a lot.
Yeah.
It's kind of a blessing and a curse depending on what you do. So
And how are you, what does it look like raising kids when you don't have hard beliefs? Um, do you teach through scripture at all, or just through life?
just through life. I
Yeah.
mean, they go to, a daycare that has some Christian background in it, and they hear about that. I mean, they came home and saying Jesus loves me, but then there's one day they came home and told me about the crucifixion, and I had to call the school and say, no, we're not going to talk to a 4-year-old about, a form of Roman torture, so sorry, you've got somebody who's in context that doesn't think that cross was some magical thing. I'm like, you might as well explain to him how the electric chair works. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, they know what I do. I mean, Milo's asked me what I thought God was, and I asked him what he thought God was, and we've had those conversations. Minnie's still, very young, and she's wild and crazy, and she's like a cross between her mom and my mom. So it's really wild to see that, because those two are very different people, and so it's really wild. It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fantastic, to be honest with you. But yeah, so we talk about things, but like talking to him about Martin Luther King and being like, well, Daddy has the same job, one of the same jobs as Martin Luther King, and Daddy's a pastor and he was a pastor, and, we read the Bible, and, so, he knows I believe in God, but, and he knows that, to me, that's Jesus, but we don't, much more than that, we don't really talk about.
Yeah.
Somebody gave me a kid's Bible to give to him, and I got rid of it, because he flipped through it and he's like, oh, are these dragons? Are these, you know what I mean? I'm just like,
Yeah.
I was brainwashed in a way to believe a lot of that stuff, and to me, I want him to have the choice, so on his mom's side, they're not Christians, and my side, I'm a Christian, but I I'm very careful with how I raise him, and it was really weird when we went to my dad's house. Like, they had a birthday cake for Jesus on Christmas, and my kids were like, well, where is he? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And my dad was reading a Bible story, which he didn't do when I was a kid, but he's done, I guess does now. And they were singing songs, and my kids didn't really, get it.
Yeah.
And I was like, happy, and at the same time, like, oh, I'm probably being judged right now, but whatever. I don't know. I just want to be fair to my kids and give them the best life they can, and let them make their own decisions.
Yeah.
So if they want to go to church when they're teenagers, they can. I did not have that choice. It was, you're going to church, you're going to this, I mean, if I have to take them, when, like, if I can't get their mom to watch or I can't get a babysitter, I take them to church with me, you know.
Yeah.
But they usually end up playing with other kids that are there, you know. Or Caleb, my buddy Caleb, ends up like showing them videos in the back of the church, you know, so we can, you know, because they're wild. They're
Yeah.
wild little kids.
Where are you guys meeting in Minneapolis?
Well, we were meeting at Bryant Lake Bowl, which is a bowling alley theater, but since COVID, we haven't met. I just go over to Caleb's house and we record the talk from there.
Yeah.
Because right now it's still not that safe, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they're opening a bit, and you can go,
Yeah.
and they're got an outdoor area, and our congregation isn't very big. We could probably do it really easy, but I just don't feel like it's the right time. And right now, me and Caleb are kind of discussing the future of Revolution and where that's going to be, and if that's going to be here in Minneapolis or if that's going to be somewhere else. So we're kind of looking at that right now. So COVID has kind of given us some time to kind of decide if we want to, you know, how we want to do it and where we want to do it. So
are you guys still like that original group, or is it just kind of you now leading it? Are there the different?
Oh yeah, it's just me. Yeah, like all the other folks have moved on, or, you know, the one in Atlanta, I turned over to somebody else, and eventually that one just kind of didn't work. And it was probably my fault because I was, you know, a big ally for LGBTQ people and they weren't. And yeah, so that was, yeah. So it's just me. It's just me and a few other people. But I got a couple of people in North Carolina who've been talking to me who want to start one. And, you know, my thing is, like, I just want to encourage people to start their own thing, you know. Being under me is no treat. And I can barely, you know, take care of one ministry and a bunch, you know. I mean, it's just really hard. Like, I want to talk and communicate and work with people, you know, trying to figure out how to file taxes and do adult stuff and hire people and get board of directors to meet and together and stuff. I mean, I'm just like very, very unorganized. So that's for me is the hard stuff, is just trying to, you know, keep organized. So yeah, I'm more comfortable doing it this way.
Yeah. No, I'm the same way. For years, I would go into bars and kind of build a community, because there was a lot of people who just wanted to talk about God and drink, which was kind of controversial around here. I would go into and help gay and lesbians build a community and talk about God, and that was super controversial back then. We went into strip clubs and stuff.
Wow.
Minister to them. I mean, it was a blast, but, you know, I was doing stuff online, but I won't even say the name of the church. It wasn't a cuss word or anything, but it was like a trigger for YouTube's algorithm. And
right.
So just kept they thought it meant something that it didn't, and they just kept taking stuff down. But we did stuff, you know, online, and it went everywhere. You know, it's powerful to do it, and I think that's the future as well. A lot of churches through the COVID time are getting used to doing that, and it can go everywhere. So that's good.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. It's been funny to watch churches like argue about what they can or can't do with online stuff, and I've been like communion and stuff like that. Like, we've been doing this for so long. We've done all that stuff, and no one's blown up or burst into flames or,
yeah,
you know, whatever.
That's good, man. Well, what's coming up for you, Jay? You got anything, projects or books or anything, or what's in the past?
Well, I had some speaking engagements, but most of those have been canceled because of the COVID. I was supposed to do some stuff in Belfast, and that got rescheduled, and then got rescheduled again, and now we're not sure when we're going to be in Belfast next. So right now, not a whole lot, you know, just trying to figure out where the church is going to be physically. And, you know, I've got 3 books that I wrote. Of course, my theology changes so much. Writing books is interesting. My last one was Faith and Doubt, and I really like that book a lot. You can get them anywhere online. I mean, it's not in print anymore, but it's still on Amazon or wherever. But yeah, I did that. And then I did another book called Fall to Grace. And then I had my first book was Son of a Preacher Man, which is kind of my, if you want to know what my original belief system was at 23,
Yeah.
21 years ago, you can read that book.
Oh.
Yeah, so I did those, and revolutionchurch.com, you can see us there. And I'm gonna hopefully be working on some stuff with my parents, about my parents, not with them, but about them, and trying to work on a couple different documentary ideas. And I've got some book ideas. I just, because I'm dyslexic, I usually don't write them out ahead of time. So I have to find a publisher who's willing to be like, here's my ideas. What do you think? So I can work with someone and we can get this down, So hopefully we'll do a couple books. I want to do a couple books I want to do one on loosely based on mental health and going through death and divorce. And then I want to do one on theology and punk rock and how does punk and theology overlap and work together. So I'd like to write those books and, just continue to go out and speak when I can and do revolution and just do my work. I like doing my work. And if that's speaking or writing or, doing films or whatever, that's what I want to do. So.
Well, I'm sure glad you guys have. I mean, I felt like quitting so many times, so that's why I go back to your haunted,
Oh, thank you.
messages. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on and telling us. It's fascinating hearing about your story and everything. And thank you for sharing about your mom. That was amazing. That was good.
Oh, you're welcome. Check out The Eyes of Tammy Faye. It's a documentary on my mom, and it's really good. And I think you'll feel like you connect with her if you see that. It's called The Eyes of Tammy Faye. And, it was done by a group called World of Wonder. It's really fascinating and a fantastic film.
Awesome. All right, guys.
All right.
Thank you. We'll see you everybody later. God bless you guys.
Bye-bye.